Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Right Talk Wednesday. I'm Kit Kalsto, your host, and I'm speaking with Irisanya Moon. And she is a pagan, somebody that I've seen online, so I'm really excited to get to know her. And let me just tell you a little bit about her, and then we can dive right in. So Irisania focuses on offering context for the past and practices for the future while uncovering sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, etc., and deconstructive narratives of oppression. Oh, I can't talk tonight. I'm sorry. And I just want to say, as somebody who is very deep in a graduate level working on disability liberation. That's just music to my ears. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And she is an author, a witch, and a priestess. And I think, I'm just going to leave it at there. We're going to talk about over the course of this show and learn more about them and their work. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that we could make this interview.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited too. I hearing that back to me, I was like, oh, that is a hard sentence to read, I'm sure. So
That's okay. It's been a day. My brain is not braining, but we're working through it. Great. So, I have, like I said, I have seen you in the pagan circles that I am also in online. Could you just expand a little bit more about your writing and your books?
yeah, so I am an author for Moon Books, which is a publisher that's based in the UK. And I started writing for them. I started doing different pieces for a whole bunch of anthologies, which I will not list because I will not remember them. And at some point they said, hey, we don't actually have a book on reclaiming witchcraft. Would you be interested in doing that? And of course, I've been a writer since I was a wee little being. And so I started writing for their Pagan Portals series, which is about traditions of witchcraft, deities. Basically, they're little intro books. They're just like 100-page books-ish about those things that I just said. And then I just kept proposing new ideas. And I've written a lot of books about Greek deities and one on Norse, a few on activism and a few on reclaiming. And currently I'm in the process of writing a book on Hecate. Um, yeah. So I think there are 10 books that you can either order or pre-order, and there's a few more that I'm finishing up.
Wow, sounds like you've been busy.
There's a pandemic. I have pandemic and ADHD really work well together. So, that was probably how I got a lot of this done.
That they do. That they do. I I talk to a lot of authors that have ADHD and there's something about the way that our brains work that on one hand makes it fascinating to write a book, but on the other, it we have so many ideas and it's who we are.
Yeah, I think it is such a gift and it can be such a hindrance sometimes, but I think I've mostly figured out how to navigate it. And I also got actually diagnosed and actually medicated like halfway through the books that I've written. So it's been interesting to also watch how I write now versus how I did.
I I bet that would be a fascinating transition. I've been diagnosed, but I cannot get medicated. So I do the best I can with what I have and have way too many ideas and not enough time.
I know. I don't want to give credit to one author that I don't really appreciate their worldview, but a time turner would be really great sometimes.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. I write about magical time travel in
Oh,
part of my fantasy. So yeah,
yeah.
I'm like, if I just had a spell, a little, they use magical watches basically. If I could just have a magical watch and be like, can I get 5 more minutes here? This is a great idea.
I know. I would use it probably, yes, for writing, but also for just a little bit more sleep. Just a little.
A little.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel a kinship with you already from that.
Mhm.
And I think too, when you were, telling me a little bit about yourself, you said that you had offered magical containers that support various ways of experiencing the world, our bodies, and the mystical. And you mentioned a book on reclaiming.
Yes.
And I feel like not only are those two topics very salient right now, but they
Mhm.
also go together very well. What do you think?
I think that, so one of the things that I think is tricky about the title Reclaiming Witchcraft is that it actually is talking about a specific tradition, not necessarily about reclaiming witchcraft, but also reclaiming witchcraft is about reclaiming witchcraft. I hope everybody got that. So one of the things that, yes, I think that they are connected and they are very important in these moments. Reclaiming as a tradition actually is very much so an evolving tradition that has worked through these different conversations about bringing in more ideas and viewpoints and recognizing where we can grow and where we have made mistakes in racism, in transphobia, etc. So I think that it's very timely and also an ongoing conversation. So I think like anything that evolves, hopefully, that we continue to have these conversations and we continue to expand not only our awareness, but also our magic to contain that or to hold that, I should say.
That sounds wonderful. And is that, just so our listeners are
Yeah.
aware, is that one of your books on pre-order that's not yet released, or is it just released?
So that was my very first book. And
Oh,
I would say to anybody who's a writer, maybe not write about your spiritual tradition for the first book that you ever write. It's intimidating. So, and also as soon as to further emphasize the evolution of our tradition, as soon as I was done turning in my last edits, we had a meeting and reclaiming, and 3 of the pages in the book were outdated. So it's published with something that's out of date, which, what are you going to do?
that happens in book publishing, and that happens, just in our rapidly evolving world.
Yeah, unfortunately, the pages don't update themselves, which would be fantastic, but also maybe not, because I don't think any of my books would ever be done. They would just keep changing.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
tell us,
I
I'm sorry.
was going to say that one came out in 2020. So that was my first pandemic book. So,
Okay. And tell us a little bit about your most recent release.
yeah. So the most recent one that's come out was in, I think, April of 2024, and that was Artemis. And so it's Artemis, goddess of the wild hunt and sovereign heart. And I was really excited to write about her because I wanted to bring in the complexity of what I noticed with a lot of Greek gods and this desire to make them soft and palatable and easy. And she's a hunter. And so there's death and things that we could talk about too, as opposed to keeping it like she's a huntress and sort of downplaying the power of her and her role.
That sounds fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I learned so much in writing these books. I don't go into these thinking that I know everything. I uncover so much along the way. And one of the things that I think really struck me about this is that I had never experienced Artemis as being vengeful. And there's a lot of stories where she is not a kind person if you are not kind to her.
That's That's a very good point. I think a lot of people do focus on those softer aspects. I notice I'm a graduate student of religious studies. And I notice that there's a lot of we will tell you this in historical context, but we won't unpack it and run it through to today. And I feel like that's where the magic happens. That, we're not ancient Greeks. We don't
No.
we can research the culture through archaeology and through things that have come down,
Mhm.
but we don't get the nuances of it. And so we have to understand that there are whole stories that are not being told.
Absolutely. I think that the thing that more and more with each book and, more and more with confidence and learning and actually remembering things that I've learned is recognizing and remembering and reminding people who are reading the books that a lot of our source materials from mythology have been translated by old white dudes, and
Hmm.
that makes a difference. And that has, because you can see it across different translations. And so how we're telling the stories is based on how people wanted those stories told and not always how they actually were. And so I really impress in all of my books to try to read multiple sources and definitely find women translations, which there are tons of them. I don't know why they're hidden, but trying to expand the context will help you see things possibly in a different way than you've been taught.
Yeah, and I would just add that goes for anything. One of my special interests is yoga and yoga philosophy. And it wasn't until I took some graduate level seminars on um, historiography, and Indian history specifically to learn, what's a construct, what isn't. There's when you go deeper, it's very daunting, but I think it's
Mhm.
also very illuminating.
Absolutely. I think that, what I think I'm running into right now, I wrote a book that's not coming out till I think next year on the pantheon of the Greeks. And what I realized in writing that was, oh, I need to learn Greek because there is nuance and there's
Mhm.
different dialects. And I was, oh, so we're gonna try. We're gonna give it a whirl. But really, like there is so much value in really going to the source and meeting it where it's at.
There really is, and I will add, there are college level but appear to be very accessible books on ancient Greek on
Yep.
Amazon. Yeah.
There's a whole free college level course on YouTube.
Oh,
Yeah, I've found it. I have many interests in many directions. So we're trying. We're going to start with Duolingo and then we're going to move to ancient Greek, but one at a time, one at a time. Yeah.
exactly. One day at a time. But yeah, I think if you can become familiar with source material and with languages, I was reading a book for one of the semester's papers, and the author, being a PhD in religious studies from one of the universities that requires like ancient Greek and Latin, just
Mhm.
like throws in whole paragraphs in Latin. And my spouse and I were like going, okay, without going to like Google Translate, we're like, we think, okay, this word is this word is this, and we were working our way through it. But oh man, I was like, oh, if I knew all that.
I think that it's a great reminder that the folks who do and have learned all of that didn't have all the stuff that we have right now as distractions. And if I was funded to study all of that, absolutely, I would be very focused. Alas, not quite yet.
Sure. So, so with that, just because I like to make sure we get our links in there. Of course, all of the links will be in the show notes. And we've got your website. Do you have a Patreon or a tip jar or a way for readers to maybe help you get funded to learn all that?
So there is a link on my bio sites, sort of link tree. It's not a link tree, but it's bio sites.
Hmm.
At the bottom, there is, I think it's the Ko-Fi coffee
Hmm.
one. I have that. That's really great. I'm also going to convert part of my Substack newsletter into a paid subscription. And there you're going to be able to watch some of my writings in progress. And also I'm going to talk about how I work through and create the books that I have, because for the last two books, I took notes on that process. So I can go back and show you how I wrote about the pantheon of the Greeks and how long it took me and what I considered and etc.
Oh, how exciting. That just
Mhm.
sounds fascinating.
Right? I find it super fascinating. I'm really glad I started to take notes. So that book and The Muses, which I also finished, that was a very interesting process, unsurprisingly.
Certainly. And so all of those links are on your website if our listeners slash viewers go there?
So the links are going to be on my website. My website's in transition, but if you go there, I will make sure that they are there by the time
Okay.
this goes to by the time this goes to the viewing, listening audience. Mhm,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
mhm. Absolutely.
Great. Well, I want to kind of we've talked about it in some respects, but something I have found as a neurodivergent author is being interested in what you're writing from the heart. I know, Moon Books has asked you to write some things, but writing from the heart, I think, helps. I'd like to talk about how, if you're comfortable, your personal practices or your personal kind of interests work into your writing.
Yeah, so that's great. And also, I'm really lucky. Moon Books is very supportive of my sort of vision on things, and they have been really supportive of the way that I approach writing these books, because I could write them in the way that most people do, but I write them from how do I create an accessible way for folks to build relationships with gods? Because I think, and in the end, that's the important part. Not that the history isn't important, not that the facts aren't important, but the relationships that you build may inform you in different ways than, the source text do, but they're a good starting point. So the second book that I wrote was Aphrodite, and she is still the most popular book of all of mine. And it probably isn't surprising to hear that she's the person being I work with the most. She is a god that really came to me out of nowhere, who I refused to work with for a very long time because I thought she was too easy. Turns out I was wrong. And so I tend to write about gods that I either have a relationship with or one that I want to have a relationship with. So I have written about Aphrodite. I have written about Iris, which is what my name is for, because there were no books on Iris. And I have written about the Norns. It's my one not Greek book. And Gaia, Artemis. Oh, I'm going to forget somebody. And Circe is next. Hestia is after that. The Greek pantheon, the Muses, and then Hecate, and then Athena. So I have relationships with these gods. And then the other books I've written, two are on reclaiming, and one's on health and well-being, but not from the traditional lens.
Can we talk about that one a little bit more? I think um, that's something that a lot of people are interested in, and I think it's also, again, something that's very salient to right now.
Yeah, so it's part of a series called Practically Pagan, and it was started by Moon Books, and mine is called An Alternative Guide to Health and Well-Being. That also came out in 2020, and it was my first book that was reviewed by Publishers Weekly, and they had a very lovely little spread on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know. I was really surprised. My third book. And it also coincidentally came out on my birthday in 2020, which I thought was funny. So basically, I went back and looked at it the other day because, I wrote that a while ago. And I looked at it and it focuses on really learning about what your body says to you. It does not focus on like, here are the steps for all the things, but more about listening to who you are and what meets your needs. So it is really what I might describe today as an ongoing dialogue with, whatever you perceive to be your inclination in life, which sounds really vague, but also I like to keep things open and accessible. It's not a here's what you eat and here's how much you move. Like it's nothing like that because I can't say that for people, nor am I an expert. So basically, it guides folks through getting to know themselves and trusting themselves and how they can journal about this, build practices that help, learn about how to care for themselves. Also, I navigate that balance is kind of a myth. Uh, I wish that I hadn't used the phrase self-care now because I use a different phrase now, but it talks about that and how to use that accurately versus how it's been co-opted by capitalism and how it was, in my opinion, sort of stolen from Audre Lorde, because that whole quote is actually not for white women like me. I felt like that quote was more for Black women. So I use the term self-devotion. So the book is basically building a practice that's devoted to yourself. So if I could go back, that's really the lens. But it's more about listening, really focusing on listening to also the feedback that you get from your body without like really clinging to one ideal or without saying that there is a right way to do it.
That sounds amazing. That sounds awesome. I love it.
I really liked it. And also like it's called Practically Pagan because we were supposed to be kind of sneaky about fitting some magic in there. And so at the end, I have a practice about building your own pentacle as a tool. So it's a practice that is in fairy tradition that Reclaiming has been influenced by. We could probably say something else, but that's what I'm going to say, folks. I know that it's complicated, but so there's the iron and the pearl pentacle in fairy. So I offer a practice of creating your own pentacle, which can be used as a meditation tool, can be used as, I like to use it as a tool of diagnosis where you run the points of the pentacle through your body. And thus you might see where your energy's at. Like if one point is sort of off, maybe you, okay, like what can I do there? If the energy doesn't run well between 2 points, what can I do there? So I offer just a really basic pagan-esque practice for folks to also use if they are inclined.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I love it. Thank you so much for
Mhm.
sharing that with us. That is great. Um, we are kind of closing in on our time here today. And again, every single one of my guests, but I can tell, but like we could talk, for a long time about various different subjects.
No, this is just the surface, folks, just the surface.
Just the surface, yeah. In fact, I've got some ideas for some roundtables, so you may be hearing from me again.
Love it. I'm here for that or there for that.
Yeah. But what I always like to ask is there anything that I haven't asked about your books or your
Mm.
writing that you'd like to share with our listeners slash viewers?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a great question when folks ask me that. I think that what I would love to be asked sometimes, is there anything that surprised you in your writing? Because I think that there's often this image that writers go in and they kind of know what they're doing, and then they write the book. Now it's hard and it's challenging, but have you ever been surprised by what you found? And yes, I have many times. I really thought I was going in certain directions and then had to completely reroute the course. The one that I can think of that's most recent, because that's, the one I'll remember the most, writing about the Greek pantheon. I had never read so much sexual assault in my life when I was reading a lot of the stories. And I didn't realize that. I felt a little overwhelmed by that. So I put a whole section in the book about the context what they're going to see in there and how people in many, many universities have written about the same thing. Because I think it's important to establish context in what I'm saying, especially when I didn't know it was there. So that's one of the things that surprised me the most. That was not that it was there, but more that it was so prevalent. I guess I don't know. I guess I don't read a lot of stories about Poseidon. And now not my favorite. I have favorites. He is not one. But also there's a context thing. It was different. That was seen differently. And so I think that the surprise is not just these things existed, but there is a lot of nuance that is really helpful to consider. Because otherwise, I know that I can very quickly write off things if I'm sort of presented with one piece of information, but nuance helps me to understand, okay, I'm not going to go into it. I could unpack that forever, but there is a lot of nuance and I'm really happy that I'm learning that. It's made me a better person and a better writer.
I'm so glad you shared that. Yeah, the Greek pantheon is interesting
They're
in that
messy. That's what I like to say. They're
messy.
messy.
Yeah, yeah. In that regard, yeah.
Mhm.
And again, it's just an excellent point for nuance. It's something I'm learning with, my deep dive into disability liberation and a lot of the disability writing. It's like, there's nuance here. It's not exactly what you think it is. And
I think that if my hope is that bringing up nuance not only offers more perspectives, but also inspires curiosity for
mhm.
folks to not settle in one direction, possibly ever. Because I think that there's ongoing experiences to learn from. I grow as a person. I hope that that's what it inspires because most of my books are landing in how do I build relationships? And relationships are all about nuance.
And relationships are messy.
Yeah, very real, very real. I, sometimes I see the Greeks and I was like, oh, I mean, you're messy too. Sometimes I get petty too. That's true. That's fair.
Yeah.
Not that petty, but petty.
Very much so. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. And just to, again, remind our listeners that, and our viewers that the links are all going to be in our show notes. They'll be on the Muse Charmer Network website. And if you're watching on YouTube, they'll be there. The links will be everywhere. And I encourage you to click early and click often. So
Absolutely. We love that. We love
yes.
that so much.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And if you've heard something here that resonates with you, feel free to share this podcast around. That's how authors, like us get found is by people sharing our work. And so, yeah, I encourage everybody to do that. I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank
This has been
you.
a lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for great questions.